Final Pomp's crush knew he liked her and decided to have a bit of fun. She told him she would only go out with him if he held water in his mouth for a whole school day. He got most of the way through the day until science class when he coughed and spat the water all over someone's homework. He thought his chances were lost, but then she whispered to him, "You get an A for effort," and passed him a Hershey's chocolate kiss. He thought she was super cool, but when she walked away, she did a dab without looking and accidentally punched a kid in the face. Ah, the crazy things we do for love. When Dolan was 3 or 4, his grandma drank so much, she got confused and started singing happy birthday, but it wasn't Dolan's birthday. 5 minutes later, she stripped naked and jumped in the freezing cold water of Dolan's pool. As soon as she jumped in, she started screaming, "Dolan, this alligator's getting me, help!" It ended up taking 3 hours to get her out of the pool.
Biting your fingernails is pretty common, but when Doopy gets nervous, she bites down on her actual fingers. One time during a math test, Doopy bit down so hard that blood started pouring out of her finger. Her teacher thought something serious had happened and sent her straight to the nurse's office. Doopy was pretty embarrassed when she told the nurse that her injury, well, it was self-inflicted. Pringle's last job, for a lack of a better word, was kind of shitty. He worked customer service in a busy fast restaurant. He didn't really enjoy his job and decided to quit on a day he called Poopapalooza. Poopapalooza was the day his restaurant experienced a terror attack. Only instead of explosives, Pringle's restaurant was subject to 5 separate poo attacks. In one day, Pringle had to enter the men's room 3 times and the woman's room twice to clean up customers' shit, which had been smeared all over the toilet walls. Pringle isn't sure if Poopapalooza was planned or a random coincidence, but it inspired him to quit. Talk about your shitty day of work.
One day, Pringle went shopping with his mum and grandparents, and they went into a clothing store, so Pringle waited outside with his grandpa. While he was waiting, Pringle's allergies struck and he had a terrible sneezing fit. He'd forgotten his usual tissue, so he had to borrow his grandpa's trusty red handkerchief. As he was blowing his nose, a little girl and her family walked by, and the little girl noticed Pringle and his handkerchief, and she pointed at him and loudly said,
"Daddy, what gang is that?"
"That's my best attempt at little girl voice, don't judge me." The girl's father went bright red and shushed her. He whispered that he'd tell her later, and they walked away quickly without making eye contact.
When Pandora once went to an Indian restaurant with her family, they were all happily eating their food. When her dad put half of one of his chilies on her plate, she didn't notice until her dad said she ate the whole thing. For the next 15 minutes, she was screaming and drinking everyone else's drinks, including her mom's champagne. Her dad found it so funny he told her, "Eat another one and I'll give you $50. She couldn't resist an offer like that and spent another 20 minutes panting while the hot chili stung her whole mouth.
When Civil Spider was 17, he lost his virginity at a party. It was with his girlfriend, but since it was his first time, Civil Spider had no idea what he was doing and performed terribly. When Civil Spider woke up the next morning, his girlfriend had gotten out of bed before him. He looked around and saw her giving another guy head under a blanket just 5 feet from him. Civil Spider lost his shit and started screaming at both of them. Needless to say, he no longer talks to her. But he heard through the grapevine that she caught a bunch of STDs and had a kid before graduating high school. Civil Spider definitely dodged a bullet.
When Emoji was little, his oldest sister was the worst babysitter. One time, he left his stuffed animal Clifford in the living room, and she knew it was there and that he couldn't sleep without it. He decided to grab it and go back to bed. She saw him come out of his room, but she yelled at him to get back in bed. He kept walking out to get Clifford, but she got up, grabbed his ear, and dragged him to bed. He tried getting his Clifford 10 more times when he got to him. Emoji grabbed him and proceeded to walk back to bed when she saw him. His sister got up, grabbed Clifford, and tried to pull it away from him, but he didn't let go. She threw him to the ground and kept pulling on Clifford while holding him down with her foot. Emoji eventually let go, and she grabbed his arm and pulled him to his room, not even giving him time to get up. He cried, but she put a hand on his mouth to prevent him from screaming. She continued hearing noises coming from him, so she plugged his nose as well so he couldn't breathe. She also had his hands and legs pinned down. After she left, Emoji got up and ran to grab Clifford again, then ran back to bed.
One night, Gugak's family took him to a buffet to celebrate him placing first in the school band. During the night, Gogak went to the bathroom, and as he was on his way back to the table, some guy pushed out his chair and tripped him. Gogak fell right into a nearby waitress. The waitress lost her balance and they fell to the floor. When Gogak opened his eyes, he found his whole face was deep inside her cleavage. He quickly got up and apologized while his whole family laughed like a pack of hyenas. Gogak is now extremely cautious at restaurants and especially around titties.
Back when Doopy was a deli manager, she had a very well-known NASCAR driver at the counter. He placed an order for 4 pounds of all beef salami. The next customer came up, looking like he was about to explode. He said, "I was going to order some all beef salami, but you gave the last of it to him! So I guess I'll take the most expensive meat you have, and you can charge me for salami." She responded by saying,
I apologize. However, I have no control over how much someone buys, and I can't determine how much of a product we should order in advance. Perhaps there's something else I can interest you in?
In response, the customer dropped his pants and took a dump on the floor, right in front of the counter. He was escorted out of the building quickly and charged with public indecency.
Last year, Dolan's brother had a long day at work, but he couldn't sleep. At about 3 a.m., he decided to try to nod off. It took a while until he finally got to sleep, but maybe after an hour, he woke up after having a nightmare. Dolan's brother woke up to the image of what looked like his mother, who had passed away about 3 years prior. She was standing at the edge of his bed, but her head was the head of a large boar, sewn on by razor wire, blood seeping from the stitching. Dolan's brother tried to make a noise, but he couldn't. Suddenly, the thing opened its mouth, and it let out a half-human pig scream that made him go cold. He couldn't move, breathe, or do anything but stare in horror. He then snapped out of it, and his fiancée was shaking him, as it turned out that Dolan's brother was talking in his sleep. This was not surprising, as he often had nightmares. But what surprised him was that his older brother, who was about 28 at the time, called and told him about a dream that he had had, which was exactly like his, and that the only difference was that it said something to him. Go help your brother. The dream still freaks out Dolan's brother to this day. When Tolop was little, he used to live in the poor side of Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada. He was 6 years old at the time, and his mother had went to work, and his older brother had gone to the store. He was sitting in his room watching television when he heard a tap on the window, and then on his door. He never took notice until it happened 3 more times. Tolop was getting scared. He went to find the phone, and then he saw a grown man with a terrifying smile. He looked dead to Tolop, who was paralyzed with fear. Then the man ran to the backyard and cut the power, and as a little kid, he felt the world was going to end for him in about 5 seconds. After the power was cut, Tolop heard the window smash in the laundry room. As soon as he heard that, Tolop ran so fast up the stairs that he was practically tripping on his own feet. He ran in his room and he hid under the bed. The man looked for him in all the rooms, cursing and saying he will kill him if he finds him. Then he went into Tolop's room and was laughing like a crazy person. Tolop was crying and wished he would never find him. But the unthinkable happened, and the man grabbed his leg and dragged him out from under the bed. The man held Tolop by the neck, who then kicked him. The man dropped Tolop, who hopped out of the window, and when he landed, he sprained his ankle and he limped to the neighbor's house where he called the police, telling them everything that had happened. When they finally came, his mom was crying, and she was happy that he was okay. And if you're wondering, the police never found the man.
When Gooby was 7 years old, she visited her friend Emoji's house. While they were watching TV, Emoji's 3-year-old brother came upstairs and said to them, "Is the man in the coat really going to burn the house?" Emoji asked who that was, but her brother just said the man in the coat. As soon as she took out her phone to call the police, Gooby smelt something burning. They both ran downstairs to find the whole kitchen on fire. When the fire brigade arrived, the child told them, "I'm going to join his cult one day and burn kitchens too."
Back when she worked at Godfather's Pizza, Ramona took a phone call on her first day. The customer on the other end was a cantankerous old woman who wanted to talk to the manager. So Ramona put her on hold, or tried to. Still learning the phone system, Ramona had accidentally put the woman on speaker instead of on hold. So while the old woman was holding, Ramona joked to one of her coworkers that the reason the woman talked to them in such a rude way was probably because her husband left her. The woman heard Ramona's comment and hung up. Nobody heard from her since.
Snoopy better friend, $30 to sing It's Beginning to Look a Lot Like Murder during a school talent show. That might seem tame, but their school was a very conservative and strict Catholic school, so singing that in front of a bunch of nuns in the facility was kind of a big deal. Snoopy's friend got called to the guidance counselor and ratted Snoopy out for the bed, so Snoopy was sent in too and both their parents were called. Long story short, they were both grounded. Snoopy's mom monitored the website she visited for a while, and her friends stopped hanging out with her because her parents said Snoopy was a bad influence.
Once I was invited to this rager, right? There had to have been at least 1,500 people there. There was a DJ, a pool, beer pong, people were snorting Coca-Cola off each other's stomachs. It was a blast until a bright light shined from above. You could barely see it because it was so bright, but I'm sure I saw a disc-shaped object. Then I woke up on a beach all by myself. I don't know what happened, but since then I haven't been able to go near magnetic things without getting a migraine. And sometimes people tell me I cluck like a chicken without realizing it. Okay? I'm sorry, I've never been to a party.
One time when Sidious was waiting for his bus at the corner bus stop, a 20-year-old man stood next to him with a box of Tootsie Rolls. He stood silent for about 20 seconds, then turned to Sidious and said, "Hey, you want a box of Tootsie Rolls?" He politely told him no, but instead of leaving him alone, the guy kept pressuring Sid into taking them, pretty much shoving the box in his face. Soon the bus came, and when Sid got on, he looked back to see the man casually walking away from the bus stop. Apparently, he wasn't even waiting for the bus.
One day, an old man decided to sit next to Melissa at a bus stop. They sat in silence for a while, and then the old man kept trying to tell her jokes. He insisted on talking to her. She sighed, and she decided to acknowledge him. "What does a rock say to another rock?" he asked her. "I don't know," she replied with a tone that insisted that she did not care. "Life is hard," he whispered to her. She shuddered, and she thanked her bird god when the bus finally arrived.
Pandora once saw a kid, hellbent, strip to his underwear and run through the hallways yelling,
Hey girls, look at my fresh apples!
She turned her head away and, as soon as she opened her locker, he fell. She was going to help him up when a girl yelled, "Oh my gosh, Pandora, stop banging him!" Pandora was so ticked that she accidentally made the girl slip and land in a puddle of apple juice.
One time, Pandora went to the Apple store to get her phone fixed. While she was there, she saw a 6-year-old girl dressed in the latest fashion with her mom, dad, and grandma. They were buying their daughter her first phone and were letting her choose which one she wanted. At first, they pointed out one of the budget ones, but the kid screamed, "No, I don't want that phone!" She pointed at the latest model and said, "I want that one." When her parents tried to redirect her interest to the cheaper models, she started screaming. Her grandma tried calming her down and got repeatedly slapped in her face. In the end, Grandma had to drag her out of the store while her parents caved and got her the top-of-the-line phone. Great parenting, guys.
When Melissa was 17 and her sister was 12, they went hiking in the woods with their family dog in rural Missouri. They didn't get very deep into the woods when they found what looked to be an abandoned playground. The place was in bad shape. The equipment was rusty and falling apart, and nature was taking over. The whole place had a "you don't belong here" vibe. After a couple of minutes, Melissa and her sister heard a loud bang come from what was left of some monkey bars. Neither of them really remember what happened afterwards. All Melissa could remember was a massive headache and then waking up outside in the woods, sprawled out on the ground with her still unconscious sister clinging to her arm. Melissa had to carry her sister back home.
Sidious was in school with a friend, and they were pretty bored. He said to his friend, "Hey dude, you want to hear a joke?" And he said, "Sure." So Sidious began. He said, "A guy wakes up in the morning and he digs a 10-meter hole. The next day he goes back and digs another 10 meters, and another, and another." He repeated the last line until his friend said, "Dude, stop. That isn't even funny." To which Sidious replied, "It might not be that funny, but you can't deny it's not deep." Sidious snort laughed until he realized that his friend wasn't laughing, or even smiling, and then they just went back to sitting in silence.
The worst customer Hellbent ever served was a guy who walked into the grocery store and immediately started to piss and shit everywhere. When anyone tried to stop the customer, he would beat them up. He took off all of his clothes and walked around like nothing was wrong. Hellbent approached the customer and said,
"Dude, you need to put some clothes on right now."
but instead of putting his clothes back on, he covered himself in snacks that were in the aisles. Hellbent walked up to him and grabbed the crazy guy in a headlock before throwing him out. Luckily, he never returned to that supermarket ever again.
Moji went to a restaurant with his friends one day. One of his friends brought his 5 or 6 year old kid. Things were pretty chill until the little dude looked straight into his dad's eyes and said, "I'm going to say the A-word." The kid's parents were concerned and tried to hush the kid before he could start spewing racial slurs, but they were too late. The kid took his shirt off and started screaming, "Nipple, nipple, nipple!" While running around the restaurant. His parents were both relieved and very embarrassed that their child was screaming nipple in a burger joint. Emoji thinks that it's better than the actual N-word.
The number one memory that I cringe about. I've told cringy stories in DTS before, however, I have another one, and that involves camp when I was in, I think, grade 4. I was around 10 years old, something like that. I was sleeping in a room with 3 of my friends, and what happened was the toilets are completely separate from the camp building, and so in order to get to the toilets, you have to wake up like a teacher, get them to escort you over there and all that. It was just a big pain. And it was the middle of the night. I'm up at like 1 a.m. like usual. Everyone else is asleep. And I really need to take a goddamn piss. I can't even leave the building because it's all locked down. Like I can't go near a tree or anything. So I ended up just trying to hold it. Didn't work. I ended up pissing in my sleeping bag. I just full flow, like psh, like it just streamed out. The whole bag was moist. And so what happened was I stuffed the sleeping bag under the bed, and I woke up someone, like a teacher, and I say, "Can I just like borrow a blanket, just like an extra blanket please?" And they gave me one. I woke up with that, and that was it. Like I thought I got away with it, but the rest of the trip, my friends were like, What the fuck? What is that smell? Wait, do you guys smell that? Like this whole goddamn time we've been here, I've been smelling piss, and I'm just sitting there like, yeah, that's strange, isn't it? What could it be? What? And they never found out. You know, I was so fucking lucky. So lucky. But now you all know, I pissed the sleeping bag. It was great. Felt amazing. One time, Gooby was in band class and had to do an assessment. She was really nervous about messing up in front of an audience. The teacher assured her that everything would be fine. Nothing bad would happen. But Gooby still didn't want to do it. When her turn came, she raised the instrument to her mouth and played one off-key note. The teacher smiled and said,
See, nothing bad happened. Huh?
As soon as he said that, the power mysteriously went out in the entire school. It lasted the entire afternoon and no one could explain why. To this day, Gooby's friends like to tease her, saying she was responsible because of her terrible performance. Which isn't exactly a huge confidence boost, but hey.
One time, Helvin went to get a haircut. He very clearly told the barber what he wanted, and the barber went to work. When he was done, Helvin looked in the mirror and saw that his hairstyle was totally different to what he asked for. When he asked the barber what happened, the barber said he heard Helvin's request, but decided this different style would be better. Helvin asked him to fix it, but the barber screamed at him and told him to leave. Helvin had to wear a hat for the next couple of weeks. He never went to that barber shop again.
Back in school, Doopy needed to excuse herself from class as she was having girl issues. However, this teacher wouldn't let kids be excused without a reason. Her desk was in front of the class, just in front of the blackboard. There were a few boys in the class, so Doopy hoped the teacher would get it without her explaining it. Doopy went up to the teacher and said she had a girl issue to deal with. However, the teacher wouldn't let her go without an explanation. Suddenly, somebody behind them said, "Ugh, what is that smell?" Doopy then yelled out,
I gotta change my pad!
The boys began to laugh, and she was allowed to go to the bathroom, but she felt horribly embarrassed thanks to the teacher.
The most memorable piece of advice Hellbent has ever gotten was when he was 17. He was on the phone talking to his friend when his friend suddenly said,
If you ever play with a Ouija board, make sure you ask the spirit to have sex with you.
Hellbent doesn't know what his friend was smoking because this advice came out of nowhere. Still, he's kept the advice in mind, just in case he's ever feeling lonely or comes across a Ouija board.
One time when Gogak and Melon were at a Walmart checking out new Nintendo games, Melon grabbed a book from the shelf nearby. She flipped the picture of Dark Pit from Super Smash for Wii U, pretending to read it before shoving it in Gogak's face and giving him a big hug and kiss. Some random guy from behind them shouted from halfway down the aisle, "Your kids are disgusting! Go get a freaking life!" So Melon found the Pikachu page, jumped over the counter, shoved it in his face, said, "Pika, Pika, motherfucker!" and kicked him straight in the balls. The guy fell over crying, kicking the shelves and spinning in circles.
The worst teacher that Legna ever had was a substitute who just hated kids. While he was working, a kid sneezed. She screamed at the kid and said that if he sneezed too loud again, he wouldn't get recess. Then, Legna asked his friend for help with his work, but she yelled at him. He went to ask her, but she told him to sit down. And a year later, she was fired. Ramona was getting sexy for the first time with her boyfriend at the time. They had just finished their foreplay when he put his mouth right up against Ramona's ear and said, "You have the softest pubic hair I have ever felt." Ramona cringed and died a little on the inside. It totally killed the mood, and it took everything she had not to laugh. Dean the Time Wanderer was 16 when he got his first job at Walmart. He saw lots of weird stuff in this job, but the strangest thing by far was when a gang of furries came in. Dean was innocently talking to a coworker when 15 people wearing fursuits came in, riding on shopping carts. They swore, and they shouted, and they knocked stuff over. When Dean's boss tried to get them to settle down, they tackled him to the ground. After causing a huge mess, they eventually got bored and left, but not before buying 20 cans of cat food on their way out.
Pringle got married when he was in the US Navy. A few weeks after his marriage, his submarine was going out to sea for 2 weeks before his major deployment. Pringle's wife was sending emails to him back and forth until around 3 days before he came back, so he got worried. On the way home, Pringle kept calling his cell phone until a man answered the phone and said, "Quit calling my girlfriend." When Pringle finally got home, his house was emptied. Everything was gone, all the furniture he bought, all the electronics, everything. He talked to his neighbors who showed Pringle who the new man was since she had brought him to his house. Turned out Pringle's wife left him for a heroin junkie. A week later, Pringle had to go to his deployment in the Arctic.
The weirdest thing Melissa's 10-year-old sister does is bark at everyone and everything. At the store, she'll run up to strangers to bark and growl at them. She won't answer to her real name, so Melissa has to call her by her dog name, Scarlet. She uses Scarlet, the dog, as her username for everything online. Melissa's sister even barks at Melissa's dog and claims she understands her, then chews on the dog toy.
When she was 11, Spences loved writing fan fiction as well as normal stories. One day, her dad read one of her normal stories and liked it so much he wanted to show it to her teacher. On the night of parent-teacher conferences, Spences went to her bedroom and grabbed her book with her story so her dad could show her teacher. After he left for the conferences, she went back to her bedroom to work on some more fan fiction, which she wanted to keep secret because it was very violent. However, the book of writing she found had the story her dad wanted to show to the teacher. That's when Spences noticed that her teacher was about to read an extremely violent piece of fan fiction. Her heart began to race, and she didn't know what to do. At school the next day, her teacher glared at her a lot. She also ended up getting in trouble with her dad. As a result, she stopped writing fan fiction.
One day, Andy's family came over and the kids decided to play some video games. They settled on a 4-playing fighting game with monsters. Andy, her brother, and her older cousin were all playing, but they still needed a 4th player. They decided to get Andy's younger cousin to play, even though he couldn't talk and was still in diapers. Baby cousin didn't know what the hell was going on, so he just smashed the buttons with his hand for the whole match. The crazy thing is, he ended up whooping Andy and the other players' butts. Even when they tried to gang up on his character or use special moves, they barely had a hit in. This was a game they were all good at. I think this MLG baby should start looking for sponsors.
So Melissa and her friend were going to bake a cake. The thing about this was that they had a lot of different chocolate mixes and marshmallows. They tried to create a layer cake by putting the marshmallows at the very bottom and started putting the different mixes, including the browning mix, above the others. This was for a friend of theirs who was a chocoholic. She was addicted to Chocohol. They baked it, then took it out. Though the cake felt a little heavy, they thought it was fine and let it cool. Melissa and her friend went to their friend's house with the cake. It felt like it weighed a good 20 pounds. Melissa's friend put it on the birthday person's counter, but it fell and made a loud thud. The fun part for them was turning it upside down and getting the thing out. It took a few tries until it came loose. What ended up happening is that the marshmallows had caramelized on the very bottom, making it hard as hell. But it only got worse. Now was the time to cut it. They got a good, sturdy, heavy cutting knife and began to try cutting it. After a few attempts and breaking the knife from the handle, they got a serrated knife and began sawing it. Almost nobody could finish a single piece of it, as the sugar content and the chocolate taste of it would easily put any diabetic into a coma. The only reason Melissa finished one piece was because she was determined to not let a piece of food go to waste. They dubbed it Death by Chocolate with the density of plutonium.